When I, Will Lawson, met Linda Peters, I knew she had a passion bridge. She's apparently been playing since 8th grade, mostly with her longtime partner Garrett Hinham, and had achieved Master of Sport status by the time she was 19. She was a bronze medalist in the sport by the time she was 22, and at the age of 24 when I met her, she was a silver medalist. Shortly after I met her, she proudly stated that 2 of her main goals in life were to become a Grand Master of Bridge, to reach the highest level attainable, and, more importantly, to win the World Mixed Doubles Championship. When I was first introduced to Garrett, I was very suspicious. He's a nice guy, my age, a year older than Linda, outgoing, and he and Linda seemed to have a real relationship, even though they didn't. However, I was relieved when I later met his wife, Cecilia. Cecilia is cute, short, bubbly, and has a very nice, toned body, including a spectacular ass for a woman who weighs approximately 50 kilos. I remember thinking, if Garrett has Cecilia, there's no reason for him to hit on Linda. Although Linda is, at least in my opinion, beautiful and sexy, she is very different from Cecilia. She is tall, brunette, large-breasted, and reserved, almost the exact opposite of Cecilia. Because most men have certain types, and Linda is my type. I assumed that Linda was not Garrett's type, and having come to this conclusion, I began dating her seriously. Linda seemed to fall in love with me almost as quickly as I fell in love with her. She seemed very happy to spend all her time with me, except when she was working or playing bridge. I wasn't surprised when she accepted my marriage proposal, and we were only engaged for 3 months that would have been 2 months and 3 weeks. But Linda and Garrett held a regional tournament one weekend during that time. Married life was good, although Linda and I had quite a lot in common, including our musical tastes, our politics, and our penchant for practicing together. I thought it would be nice if I could share her love of bridge. Although most of my life I played poker and hearts, I was above average at both, but I never tried bridge. My goal was not to replace Garrett in her doubles competition, but simply to make sure I could talk to her about it and go to some low-level tournaments out of town. In order to be able to play bridge, I would need my own low-level partner. After thinking about it for just a few minutes, I thought, why not Cecilia? I liked Cecilia, and she had the same problems as me with her husband's commitment to bridge. She was also at my beginner level. After Linda and I got married a few months ago, while Garrett and Linda were at a tournament on Saturday, I called Cecilia and invited her to dinner on Saturday. She happily agreed. We had a nice chat while I prepared the chicken parmesan. She helped us prepare a salad, and we shared a bottle of wine before and during dinner. After dinner, Cecilia and I retired to the balcony of our apartment and put our feet up. Cecilia, besides simply wanting to enjoy your company, I had another reason to invite you tonight. Have you ever thought about taking up a bridge? After a short pause and a guilty smile, she answered, Of course I thought. I mean, this is very important to Garrett, and he's my husband, so I have to. However, I will never reach his level, and I don't know if I would consider myself a failure. Besides, I'm not sure I have the guts to do it. I chuckled. I'm sure you have enough intelligence for this. What if you could start playing with another newbie and could learn enough to talk intelligently about it with Garrett and maybe go to some of the same out-of-town tournaments? Are you offering this to me, Will? She laughed. In a sense, yes, I laughed in response. I would like to start learning bridge, but I need a partner. Who could possibly be a better partner than you? I have absolutely no expectations or even desire to be in the same class as Linda and Garrett. But I would like to have something else in common with Linda and an excuse to go to some tournaments out of town. Cecilia looked thoughtful for a second and then said, Let's do this. Do we ask our spouses to teach us, or do we take classes, or what? Why don't we talk to Linda and Garrett on Monday and see what they suggest? In fact, why don't you two come over for dinner on Monday and we can talk about it as a group? I said. Only if I can add salad, dessert, and wine. What are you thinking of making for the main course? She answered. We talked about dinner, politics, movies, and many other topics. And before we knew it, the clock showed 2:36 a.m. Since we had finished almost 3 bottles of wine, I convinced Cecilia to stay the night in our guest room. I fed her breakfast the next morning, and we parted with smiles on our faces. Even if the bridge thing didn't work out, I was glad that I had made a very suitable and nice friend. I was glad late Sunday afternoon when Linda returned with the news that she and Garrett had scored big in 3rd place in the sectional from Saturday morning until early Sunday afternoon. I was happy not only for her, but for myself too. You see, when Linda does well in a tournament, I get the night when she comes back. From the way she walked, the top 3 buttons of her blouse undone, and the smile on her face when she walked into the apartment, I could tell it was going to be a good night. Before we fell asleep, I muttered that Cecilia and Garrett were coming over for dinner the next night and that I would cook her favorite dish, fettuccine alfredo. "That's nice, Will," she muttered before falling asleep on my shoulder. Apparently what I told Linda on Sunday night about Cecilia and Garrett coming over for dinner on Monday night didn't quite get through to her. While she wasn't really offended when I reminded her about it on Monday morning, she didn't seem particularly enthusiastic about it or how it happened when Cecilia and I talked about it at dinner on Saturday night, and she slept in the guest room on Sunday morning. Still, by the time Cecilia and Garrett arrived and the smell of Alfredo sauce filled the kitchen, she was in high spirits. We had a great dinner, and from what I could tell, Linda and Garrett were delighted with our interest in bridge. That evening, they gave us our first basic lesson and advised us to enroll in a course at the community center. They agreed that our learning curve would be lower if Cecilia and I were partners. For the next 2 years, I had a wonderful life. I received 2 promotions. Linda seemed to enjoy her job, and she and I continued to do all the activities we had in common. And our sex life was great, especially if she and Garrett did well in the tournament. In addition, Cecilia and I advanced in bridge, and we even went to 2 tournaments with Linda and Garrett, which included players of all levels from the gold masters that Linda and Garrett became, to beginners like Cecilia and me. In fact, with Linda and one of my college buddies who lived nearby, Cecilia became my best friend. Linda and Garrett threw Cecilia and I a party when we received our first 2 master points. Life was fantastic. Of course, now that I've said it, you know there's a but coming. This but came in the form of another Saturday dinner with Cecilia, while Linda and Garrett were at another late-night bridge competition. This dinner was at Cecilia and Garrett's house and was hosted by Cecilia. After a pleasant meal, discussing many things over a glass of brandy, including our ongoing bridge practice, Cecilia said, "There is something serious I want to talk to you about, Will." "Get out," I smiled, and then took another sip of brandy from my glass. "I think Linda and Garrett are cheating on us at the out-of-town competition," she blurted out. Luckily, I swallowed my last sip of brandy, otherwise it would have flowed out of my nostrils. "What?" was my shocked answer. "What makes you think that?" It started the first night when we told them that one of the reasons we wanted to take up bridge was so we could go to some tournaments out of town with them, Cecilia grumbled. "I love you, Will, but I know you're one of the least observant people in the world, so I didn't expect you to notice, but I noticed." After a significant pause, she continued. "What I noticed was the slight grimace of Linda and Garrett and the fleeting eye contact between them. They quickly recovered and seemed to support us after that, but those grimaces and that fleeting glance were imprinted in my brain. Of course, your suspicions are based largely on this," I swallowed. "Yes, it is. Did you notice that at the 2 tournaments we accompanied them to, they performed poorly? In one, they scored a total of 1 master point," she correctly remembered. Unfazed by my lack of response, she continued, "Have you noticed how hot they get when they come back from competitions where they performed well?" I responded to this last comment. Wouldn't that mean they didn't have sex with each other if they were horny when they got back? Just the opposite, she answered with a great deal of authority. Cecilia continued for another 20 minutes, and from time to time I asked questions or expressed doubts. However, when she finished, I thought there might just be something to what she said. Although I was far from convinced, I was willing to go along with Cecilia's suggestion to try to find out what, if anything, was going on. That evening, we started planning. When Linda came back that Sunday, she and Garrett had a bunch of red master points, and she was beyond excited. Just before I fell asleep, my completely serene mood was ruined when Cecilia texted me saying that they had a similar situation to ours. Nice, but alarming, followed by a frown emoji. On Monday and Tuesday, Cecilia and I put the first part of our plan into action. Cecilia had several people she worked with who were technical people, especially when it came to smartphones. We both replaced dead batteries on our spouses' phones, and when they expressed concern, we offered to fix them in one day. I took Linda's phone to Cecilia's office on Monday and was able to return it to Linda by Tuesday evening. By giving out phones to Cecilia's techie friends, we did two things. First, they installed locator apps on them so we could determine supposedly to within 7 meters where they were. So, if Linda and Garrett's phones were within 25 feet of each other at midnight while traveling to an out-of-town competition, we'd know they were sharing a bed. The second thing handing over the phones to Cecilia's technicians did was allow us to view any incriminating emails, text messages, or photos. They provided this information to Cecilia, and she made a copy for me. I didn't want to find out that Linda and Garrett were cheating on us. For obvious reasons, I didn't intend to share it with my wife. I loved her and didn't want a divorce. However, it seemed like Cecilia almost wanted to find out that they were cheating on us, just to prove that she was right. Maybe not, but that's exactly what it looked like. Regardless of what any of us wanted to find, we made a promise to try to find out everything we could and to be rational about what we would do about it. The recovered emails, text messages, and photographs did not reveal anything incriminating. While, as you might expect, many emails and text messages were deleted, there was nothing even remotely indicative of cheating. All interactions between Linda and Garrett were friendly, but not flirtatious, and there were certainly no displays of affection. In fact, I had to conclude that Cecilia and I interacted with each other with a higher level of affection than Linda and Garrett. There were also no expressions of dissatisfaction with Cecilia and me, and the only risque photos Garrett had on his phone were of Cecilia, and the only ones Linda had were of me. Additionally, Cecilia and I recalled our past observations of Garrett and Linda when they were together. There was never, and I mean never, any courtship. In fact, Cecilia and I were 10 times more affectionate with each other than Garrett and Linda. The next time Linda and Garrett were away competing, Cecilia and I got together on Friday and Saturday nights. Although, as expected, their phones actually overlapped each other during the competition, as they sat less than 5 feet apart and the app wasn't sensitive enough to detect that distance, or sat next to each other at lunch or dinner. At night, their phones were at a great distance from each other, definitely more than the 7 meters that the locator app was designed for. When Cecilia and I spoke to them on the phone late at night both times, there was nothing suspicious either. In fact, I even stayed in Cecilia's guest room both nights so we could compare notes in the middle of the night. The next part of the plan was to go with them to competitions out of town. We did this twice, and both times they seemed to play poorly because they scored few master points and were in a bad mood afterwards. Then we tried making surprise appearances at tournaments outside the city. For one competition where they were supposed to stay overnight on Saturday, I arrived around 9 o'clock in the evening. I thought I had won when I got the key from the front desk with my ID and opened room 428, Linda's room. Garrett was there looking at some bridge stats. After a brief, irritable exchange, Garrett convinced me that Linda and he were in the wrong room and that she was in 601. I hurried there to find Linda also looking at bridge statistics. She was clearly surprised, but seemed happy to see me, and we had good sex that night. The next morning I left before breakfast so as not to disturb her concentration. Linda and Garrett did well in that competition, and I got what I usually get in these situations when she came back on Sunday night. Cecilia did almost exactly the same thing I did during a 2-day tournament about a month later. She also found them in different rooms on Friday night, but also stayed overnight on Saturday and simply went shopping and sightseeing in the city where the tournament was being held. Linda and Garrett did not do very well in this competition and were unhappy upon their return. Over the next 2 years, we tried a lot of other things. We were never able to come to anything definitive, although Cecilia continued to be very suspicious, and I have to admit that some things didn't really work out the way they should. However, Linda was a loving and excellent wife, and the sex was between very good and great, except on those occasions mainly when Cecilia or I went to a tournament out of town with Linda and Garrett when it didn't work out. Then for a day or two everything went wrong, but quickly returned to normal. The World Mixed Doubles Championships were approaching in Geneva, Switzerland, when things started to go wrong. The event including time to overcome jet lag, the registration reception, and then the game itself lasted approximately 8 days. Leading up to the event, Garrett and Linda did everything they could to dissuade Cecilia and I from attending without explicitly telling us that we were not invited. Given their pitiful performances in the competition Cecilia and I competed in, was it just bad luck or something else? Cecilia and I decided to put our suspicions aside for a while so that they would have the best chance of success, since winning this tournament had been their long-time dream. Maybe their most important dream of their entire life. Linda even talked about having children if they won. Their plane couldn't have been further away than over the Atlantic on the Saturday morning. They took off when Cecilia called me in desperation. "Will, I just found out something in the last hour." I spoke with John Tipton, the male half of the couple who compete in most of the competitions Garrett and Linda go to. He appears to have no malicious intent, although Linda and Garrett defeat him and his partner Judy Smith most of the time. He told me something very interesting. "What?" was my reasonable answer. He said, and it just came up in casual conversation. I didn't tell him anything about my suspicions that at every break Linda and Garrett go somewhere, and when they return, their clothes often change, and their playing improves significantly. "How long do the breaks last?" I asked. "Are they different from beginners' matches?" "Yes, they are different. 20-minute morning and afternoon breaks and 90 minutes for lunch and dinner, after which play resumes. In addition, no one ever has lunch or dinner with them or sees them at lunch or dinner. If you or I aren't there," she snorted. I wasn't sure if they could do it during 20-minute breaks, although I knew Linda well enough to know that it was possible if she was motivated enough. However, they could certainly do it during breaks for lunch and dinner. Neither of them were big eaters, and they could be full in 10 minutes. I must have been speechless for a long time because Cecilia asked, "Are you still here, Will?" Earth to Will. "Yes, I'm still here," I muttered. "Is any continuation possible?" "John says Judy might know something. She is apparently not at home right now, but should be back this afternoon." "I'll talk to her then," Cecilia replied. "Let me know," I muttered and ended the call. I couldn't really concentrate after Cecilia's call, so I mindlessly cleaned up the garage for a bit and then took a shower and just tried to watch the baseball game on TV until Cecilia called back. I was only about 15 minutes out of the shower when Cecilia burst through my front door. By that time, Cecilia and I were so close that we acted like family, and if the door was unlocked, we simply opened it. Cecilia's expression was difficult to read. It was definitely decisive. Other than that, I couldn't tell if it was angry, brooding, or what. Usually I could read her thoughts, but not this time. I stood up to greet her. She more or less disappeared into my arms. After about a minute, I took her hands, moved her away from me, looked into her eyes and asked, "What did Judy say?" A single tear appeared in Cecilia's left eye, and then she spoke in a low voice. "The only reason I'm not more upset is because for the last few years I've had this terrible feeling that they were cheating. Twice Judy saw them leave one of their rooms during their lunch break. They didn't see her, and she didn't want to characterize their appearance. The only good thing was that she never told anyone, including John. She's not a gossip. My heart sank, but only for a few seconds, because my attention was diverted by Cecilia slapping me in the face. Not very strong, but strong enough for me to notice it. As I looked at her with a puzzled expression, she calmly said, "We have a few decisions to make during the next 8 days while they're gone. However, right now the only decision you need to make is to make love to me. I'm not going to burst into tears or question my femininity and attractiveness. I'm not just going to wring my hands. We really like each other, and let's see how much we like physical relationships." I really can't explain my mood in the half hour or so that followed the statement, "We really like each other." I do know that I was shocked by her actions and impressed by her body. It took a long time before we both fully realized this. Since Garrett and Linda were due back the following Monday, Cecilia's plan involved the two of us being out as much as we could until Sunday at 6 a.m., then taking Sunday and Monday off to prepare for their return on Monday in the evening. I didn't make any complaints. In fact, Cecilia probably thought that I was completely subservient to her, because everything she suggested during our spouse's stay at the World Cup, we did. It wasn't really that I was a submissive, it was just that Cecilia was so funny and had so many good ideas that I probably couldn't have come up with anything better. During this time, each of us talked to our spouse once a day before their first card session of the day. We were pleasant and didn't talk about anything, nor about their infidelities over the years, not about our ongoing holiday. They were both in high spirits because they were really doing well. In fact, when we spoke to them on Saturday, the final day of the competition, they were in first place, and their excitement was palpable. Before our spouses were due to return home, and before our telephone conversation with them that day, Cecilia and I sat in my living room at some distance from each other, so as not to start pestering each other and have a serious argument. "Okay, Guy, how are you going to deal with Linda and Garrett's infidelity when they get home?" she asked. "I'm actually not sure. Honestly, I love Linda, and it's hard for me to think about a future without her. But for the same reason, I don't want to be a weakling or a scapegoat either," I answered after much thought. "Besides, I'm confused that sleeping with you is included in this concept. You are probably quite behind me in your thinking, since I was almost sure of their betrayal for 2 years, although we received confirmation only 8 days ago. Let me tell you what I intend to do, although it is still largely up to you, since you can completely ruin my plans," she said. "Let's listen to this," I smiled. At that moment, our mobile phones rang almost simultaneously. I went outside to answer Linda's call, while Cecilia answered Garrett's call in the living room. Linda was delighted. They won. They won the damn World Mixed Doubles Championship. She was so overjoyed that it seemed like she could fly to the moon at any moment. I received a summary of the entire competition, including a description of the winning hand and the accolades she and Garrett received. Then she told me how much she loved and missed me and promised me the night she would return. I promised that Cecilia and I would be waiting for them at the airport on Monday afternoon, and our banners wouldn't be too embarrassing. When I returned to the house, Cecilia was finishing up her conversation with Garrett. Of course, he was just as excited as Linda. As soon as Cecilia pressed the red button on her phone, she jumped into my arms and kissed me. "What was it for?" I giggled as she jumped back down and sat on the couch. "It's an expression of joy because what just happened makes everything easier. That's why, Will." "How so?" "Immediately before the call, I began to tell you what I planned to do, and now, assuming your cooperation, I can carry it out. After the excitement of their victory has died down, including after the victory party we throw for them, we tell them they have 2 more years to play bridge. And then we have babies, and it's time for the bridge game has expired. After that, it's just local bridge games, mostly friendly ones that fit into our kids' schedules." "What about the next 2 years?" I asked. "For the next 2 years, every time they go to competitions out of town, the two of us stay at home until they return home, she answered with a wide smile on her face. The next minute, many thoughts instantly flashed through my head. Although some of these things were seemingly unrelated to the final decision, important things were repeated. I loved Linda. When I was unaware of Linda's infidelity, I was not only content with my marriage, but very happy. Cecilia was a good friend. Assuming that Linda and Garrett were never together again sexually after quitting bridge, I would be very happy staying married. After about 5 years of thoughts that flashed through my head in about 60 seconds, I smiled and said, "I'm in," for which Cecilia hugged me tightly. Then she left, giving me a quick kiss and saying, "I have to stay away from you until you pick me up to take us to the airport on Monday afternoon, because we both need to recharge." After Cecilia and I picked up Garrett and Linda from the airport with, as promised, not too much embarrassing posters, over the next 2+ years, the following happened. I received my night on Monday evening when I picked Linda up from the airport. It was even better than I thought and reinforced my belief that Cecilia's plan was the best course of action. We threw a great birthday party for Linda and Garrett at the local country club. We invited all of our families, including cousins, and all of our friends, over 200 guests in total. Linda and Garrett were thrilled and eternally grateful. A week after the party, Cecilia and I met with Linda and Garrett and told them that if they wanted to stay married, they had 2 more years of competitions ahead of them, and then we would have children, and the only bridge competitions would be local ones. Surprisingly, they put up no resistance, declaring that they had fulfilled their lifelong dream in bridge, that they definitely wanted to live in marriage with us, and that as soon as the children were born, the tournaments would be canceled. Over the next 2 years, they attended an average of 1 country tournament per month. While they were gone, Cecilia and I were together all the time, and we were comfortable with each other. We were so satisfied that we didn't even think about what Linda and Garrett might be doing. Supposedly the last time Cecilia and I were supposed to be together, and at the last out-of-town competition that Linda and Garrett were going to, after which both women immediately gave up birth control. Cecilia was acting a little strange. 6 weeks after our last meeting, Cecilia invited me to lunch on a blanket in the park on a beautiful spring day. After a light meal and some banter, she got down to business. "Will, I don't quite know how to say this, so I'll just say it directly. I'm 6 weeks pregnant with your baby." "What did you say?" I gasped, luckily not burping up my Pepsi. "The last time we were together, I didn't take the pills because I had the iod removed a week before we made love. I know that's when I got pregnant." "How do you know?" "After our last meetings, I did tests for Gareth and I. Although it is possible that he can conceive a child, his chances are at the lowest level. At the same time, I checked yours," she continued, not at all embarrassed. I was going to ask her how she got the sample from me, but quickly dismissed the thought, remembering our last weekend together, so she continued, "Your results are impressive. Plus, I just know in my heart that this is your child. I will do a blood test after 10-11 weeks of pregnancy to confirm this and determine the sex of the baby." "What are you going to do?" I blurted out without thinking. "What do you mean? What am I going to do?" she snapped. She took a deep breath and then said, "I will have your child. Especially if it's a girl, no one will suspect anything since you and Garrett have the same eye and hair color, and the girl will most likely look more like me than either of you. Will you keep this a secret?" "Yes, I intend to do so, unless you and Linda get divorced, at which point I will get divorced too and claim you," she growled, crossing her arms over her chest and pouting her lips. It wasn't easy to digest, but there was nothing I could do about it except pretend to be happy. A big smile appeared on my face, and I said, "I will do everything in my power to support you emotionally, and if you ever need money, I will help with that too." Then I kissed her. There was a wide smile on her face. 2 weeks after my lunch with Cecilia, as Linda and I were lounging in bed, she smiled and said, "I have good news." Of course, Linda was pregnant. I kissed her long, hotly, and then we made love tenderly. Cecilia's little girl, her exact replica, was born 5 weeks before Linda gave birth, and my little boy, who looked exactly like the one in my baby photos. Both Linda and Cecilia took on the task of raising their children as real parents. Our families remained close. Linda and I had another little boy just 2 years after our first. Although I wasn't paranoid or suspicious, just to put my mind at ease, I ran DNA tests on both my little boys and my little girl Cecilia. I was the biological father of all three. Our firstborns were both 2.5 years old. All four of us loved being parents, and our lives were going great. Both mothers had regained their pre-pregnancy bodies and were damn attractive. Then Cecilia invited me again to have lunch in the park. This time she didn't beat around the bush. "Will, I want another child, and I want her or him to have the same biological father as my first." 10 months later, Cecilia gave birth to another sweet little girl, and it wasn't due to the virgin birth. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.